The secret behind the rescue of the 6-year-old boy's mother and Donald Trump. Imagine yourself standing in the middle of one of Manhattan's busiest streets, where life never seems to stop. The honking of cars, the sound of laughter, and the rich aroma of coffee from a nearby Starbucks blend together, creating the city's signature symphony. But today, in a quiet corner of that cafe, a strange yet inspiring story is about to unfold. Donald Trump, the man who once held the most powerful position in the world, sits silently in a corner, a copy of the New York Times partially covering his strong features. He seems completely unfazed by the bustling noise around him, until a boy, about 6 years old, approaches, his sharp eyes carrying the weight of the world. The boy stops in front of Trump's table and gently places a broken toy airplane on top of the newspaper. "Can you fix it? I need to save my mom." The child's innocent yet determined voice cuts through the air, making everyone in the cafe turn and stare. Do you believe that from this simple moment, a series of unexpected and heartwarming events will begin to unfold? Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss a single detail of this gripping journey. Together, we'll discover how a former president, a 6-year-old boy, and a broken toy airplane can change lives in ways no one could have imagined. The morning sun pierced through the glass walls of a bustling Starbucks located in the heart of Manhattan, New York. Inside, the cafe was alive with activity, as customers shuffled in and out, clutching their cups of steaming coffee. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly ground beans, mingling with the soft hum of conversations and the rhythmic whirring of espresso machines. It was just another ordinary day in the city that never sleeps. At one corner of the cafe, seated alone at a small wooden table, was Donald Trump, the former President of the United States. Clad in a tailored navy blue suit and tie, he exuded an aura of authority even amidst the chaos around him. His sharp eyes scanned the pages of the New York Times, his face expressionless but for the occasional furrow of his brow as he read headlines about politics, scandals, and global affairs. To most people, he seemed like any other businessman lost in thought, yet there was something unmistakably commanding about his presence. Across the room, a young boy named Jake sat quietly on a stool near the counter. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with tousled blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that betrayed an intelligence far beyond his years. Unlike the other children who might have been distracted by toys or games, Jake's gaze remained fixed on Trump from across the cafe. In his hand, he clutched a broken toy airplane, its wings bent awkwardly, and its paint chipped from years of use. Despite its battered appearance, the toy held great significance to the boy, who gripped it tightly as if it were a lifeline. Jake wasn't afraid. Instead, his eyes burned with determination. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, preparing himself for what lay ahead. Slowly, deliberately, he slid off the stool and made his way toward Trump's table. Each step echoed softly against the tiled floor, drawing curious glances from nearby patrons who wondered why such a small child would approach someone so prominent. When Jake finally reached the table, he stopped directly in front of Trump and placed the broken toy airplane gently onto the open newspaper spread before him. Without hesitation, the boy spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried across the cafe. "Can you fix it?" Jake asked, his tone both direct and urgent. "I need to save my mom." For a moment, Trump looked down at the toy, then back up at the boy, clearly taken aback by the unexpected interruption. A smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth, though it quickly faded when he noticed the bruise marring the tender skin of Jake's wrist. It was faint but unmistakable, a mark of violence that told a story far darker than the cheerful ambience of the cafe suggested. Trump raised an eyebrow, his initial skepticism giving way to curiosity. "You think I'm a toy repairman now?" he quipped dryly, though his words lacked their usual bite. There was something about the boy's demeanor, his unwavering gaze, his quiet resolve, that intrigued him deeply. Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only Trump could hear. "Please," he whispered, his voice trembling not with fear but with urgency. "My mom needs help." The atmosphere shifted subtly, the weight of the boy's words hanging heavy in the air. For the first time since sitting down, Trump set aside his newspaper and fully focused his attention on the child before him. Who was this boy? And why did he seek his help? As Trump opened his mouth to respond, another figure entered the scene, a man dressed in an expensive suit, his polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He moved swiftly through the crowd, his sharp features betraying a mix of irritation and calculation. When he spotted Jake standing beside Trump, his expression hardened. "Jake!" the man called out sharply, his voice cutting through the noise of the cafe. "What are you doing here? You're causing trouble again." Trump turned his head slightly, sizing up the newcomer. Something about the man triggered a memory deep within his mind, a face he hadn't seen in years, yet one he recognized instantly. Victor, a powerful lawyer and former acquaintance from his early days in business. What was he doing here, and why did he seem so concerned about a mere child? Victor approached the table, his smile forced and overly friendly as he addressed Trump. "Mr. Trump, good to see you again. This little rascal has been causing quite a commotion lately. Perhaps we should take this conversation elsewhere?" But Trump wasn't buying it. His instincts screamed warning bells, telling him there was more to this situation than met the eye. As he locked eyes with Victor, a spark of suspicion ignited within him. Why was Victor so eager to intervene? And what secrets did he hide beneath his polished exterior? Before anyone could say another word, the cafe erupted into chaos as a team of SWAT officers stormed inside, guns drawn and tactical gear glinting under the harsh lighting. The sudden intrusion startled everyone present, sending patrons scrambling for cover while employees frantically tried to calm them down. In the midst of the confusion, Jake stood tall, his small frame unshaken despite the turmoil surrounding him. With a triumphant grin, he pulled out a smartphone from his pocket and tapped the screen, revealing footage captured from hidden cameras planted throughout Victor's home. The evidence was damning, proof of domestic abuse, manipulation, and deceit. As the officers closed in on Victor, Trump watched silently, his thoughts racing. This encounter had begun as nothing more than a chance meeting in a crowded cafe, yet it had spiraled into something far greater. A battle between innocence and corruption, courage and cowardice, and perhaps, redemption for those willing to fight for it. And so, the stage was set for a story that would challenge everything they knew about power, justice, and the human spirit. The cafe had returned to its usual hum of activity after the initial shock of Jake's bold declaration. Customers resumed their conversations, baristas continued preparing drinks, and the rhythmic whirring of the espresso machine drowned out any lingering tension. But at Trump's table, the atmosphere was anything but normal. Trump sat back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on the small boy before him. The broken toy airplane still lay on the newspaper, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Though he tried to maintain his composure, the former president couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The bruise on Jake's wrist gnawed at him, a glaring reminder of the violence lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly innocent encounter. "Where did you get that bruise?" Trump asked abruptly, his voice low but commanding. His sharp eyes scanned Jake's face, searching for any sign of hesitation or fear. Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he met Trump's gaze head-on, his young features unwavering. "Victor," he replied simply, as if stating an obvious fact. "He hits Mom all the time. I tried to stop him once, and he grabbed me." Trump frowned, his skepticism warring with a growing sense of unease. He knew better than most how people could manipulate others, how they could twist words and actions to serve their own purposes. But there was something about Jake's honesty, his unshaken resolve, that made it hard to dismiss the boy's claims outright. Before Trump could press further, a familiar voice cut through the air, sending a shiver down his spine. "Jake!" Victor called out again, striding toward the table with forced cheerfulness. His perfectly pressed suit and polished shoes marked him as a man accustomed to power and authority, yet there was an edge to his demeanor that betrayed his discomfort. "What are you doing here? You're making a scene!" Victor reached the table and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his grip tight enough to be noticeable but not overtly aggressive. "Come on, buddy," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "Let's go home where we can talk about this properly." Trump watched the exchange carefully, his mind racing. Something about Victor's behavior set off alarm bells in his head. Why was he so eager to remove Jake from the situation? And why did his presence feel so eerily familiar? As Victor leaned in closer, his smile faltered slightly, revealing a flicker of panic behind his polished exterior. It was then that Trump remembered, a memory long buried but impossible to forget. Victor had been involved in one of the many scandals that had plagued Trump's early business career, a shadowy figure who specialized in hush money and cover-ups. A slow realization dawned on Trump. If Victor was connected to Jake, and by extension, to Emily, then perhaps this wasn't just a random act of domestic abuse. There was more to this story than met the eye. "You know what, Victor?" Trump said suddenly, his voice cutting through the cafe like a knife. "I think we should hear what Jake has to say. After all, isn't transparency important?" Victor stiffened, his mask of friendliness slipping for a brief moment. "Mr. Trump," he began, his voice tinged with urgency, "this is a private family matter. Surely you don't want to involve yourself in something so trivial?" But Trump wasn't backing down. He leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Victor's. "Trivial? A child with bruises on his wrist? A mother allegedly being abused? Don't insult my intelligence, Victor. Either explain yourself now, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are." The threat hung heavy in the air, silencing even the bustling cafe around them. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Victor straightened up, his face pale but composed. "Fine," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll talk. But let's do it somewhere more appropriate." Without waiting for a response, Victor gestured for Jake to follow him. The boy hesitated, glancing back at Trump with a look of uncertainty. Trump nodded reassuringly, his expression unreadable but firm. Whatever happened next, he was determined to uncover the truth. As the trio moved to a quieter corner of the cafe, away from prying eyes, the tension between them only grew thicker. Victor seated himself across from Trump, his posture rigid and defensive, while Jake remained standing beside the former president, clutching the broken toy airplane tightly. "I'll start with the basics," Victor began, his voice measured but tense. "Emily and I have been married for several years. We've had our ups and downs, yes, but nothing that warrants such dramatic accusations." Trump raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "And the bruises on Jake's wrist? Care to explain those?" Victor hesitated, his confidence faltering for a brief moment. "Accidents happen," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Kids are clumsy." Jake snorted derisively, earning a sharp glare from Victor. "Don't lie, Victor," the boy said firmly. "You pushed me when I tried to protect Mom. She's scared of you, and she won't leave because she thinks you'll hurt her." Trump leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Why would she stay with someone who abuses her? That doesn't make sense." Victor sighed heavily, his facade beginning to crack. "It's complicated," he admitted reluctantly. "Emily, she owes me a lot. Financially, emotionally, leaving wouldn't be easy for her. But staying isn't easy either," Trump countered sharply. "If what Jake says is true, then you're holding her prisoner, not just physically, but mentally too." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a new voice interrupted the conversation. It belonged to a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and disheveled hair, her appearance starkly different from the polished image Victor presented. "Victor," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "you promised me safety. You promised me happiness. But all I've gotten is pain." Emily stood there, her presence both fragile and defiant. Her eyes locked onto Trump's, and for a fleeting moment, recognition sparked between them. It was then that Trump realized the truth, the reason Emily wore his old wedding ring, the reason she had chosen Victor over him all those years ago. She hadn't wanted to. She'd been forced into it. The revelation hit Trump like a freight train, unraveling decades of unresolved emotions. He remembered Emily vividly, a bright, ambitious woman he had once loved deeply. Their relationship had ended abruptly when she announced her engagement to Victor, leaving Trump heartbroken and bitter. At the time, He had assumed she had chosen wealth and security over love. Now, however, the truth was far darker. "Emily," Trump whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and regret. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she took a step closer. "I tried," she said softly. "But Victor threatened me. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd destroy everything I cared about, including Jake." Jake wrapped his arms around his mother instinctively, his small frame trembling with emotion. "Mom, it's okay now," he murmured. "We don't have to be afraid anymore." Trump watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt a surge of protective instincts toward Emily and Jake. On the other, he couldn't help but wonder if his past failures had somehow contributed to their current predicament. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice raw with sincerity. "I should have done more to help you back then. But I promise you, I won't let history repeat itself." With that, Trump turned his attention back to Victor, whose face had grown increasingly pale. "Your time is up," Trump declared, his voice cold and resolute. "Either confess or face the consequences." The cafe had grown eerily silent as Trump's words reverberated through the room. The former president's sudden outburst had drawn the attention of every patron present, their eyes wide with shock and curiosity. But for Victor, the silence was suffocating, a prelude to the storm that was about to break loose. 5 minutes, Trump repeated, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "That's all you've got, Victor. Explain yourself, or face the consequences." Victor swallowed hard, his polished demeanor cracking under the weight of Trump's gaze. For years, he had thrived on manipulation, using his charm and influence to silence anyone who dared challenge him. But now, standing before a man who knew his darkest secrets, Victor felt the walls closing in. "You wouldn't dare," Victor shot back, attempting to regain control of the situation. His voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear lurking beneath his bravado. "A tweet from you could ruin me, but it would also destroy your reputation. People might start asking questions about our shared past." Trump leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Victor's. "Oh, I'd love nothing more than to revisit old times," he said coldly. "But let's focus on the present, shall we? Why are you so desperate to keep Jake quiet? And what exactly have you done to Emily?" Victor hesitated, his mind racing. He knew Trump wasn't bluffing. The man had proven time and again that he wasn't afraid to use social media as a weapon. A single tweet could bring Victor's carefully constructed world crashing down. But surrendering wasn't an option either. "Not yet. I don't know what this kid is talking about," Victor replied finally, forcing a laugh. "Emily and I are happily married. As for Jake, well, kids will be kids. He probably fell or something." Jake stepped forward, his small frame trembling with anger. "You liar!" he shouted, his voice ringing out across the cafe. "You hit Mom! You locked her in the garage! And when I tried to stop you, you grabbed me!" Trump watched the exchange intently, his instincts screaming warning bells. There was no mistaking the truth in Jake's words, the raw emotion, the unshakable conviction. Yet Victor remained steadfast, his denial unwavering. It was clear that brute force alone wouldn't be enough to break him. A different approach was needed. Without hesitation, Trump pulled out his smartphone, its sleek surface glinting under the harsh lighting of the cafe. With practiced ease, he began typing, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Each keystroke carried the weight of impending doom for Victor, whose face grew paler with each passing second. "This isn't just about you anymore, Victor," Trump said, his voice low but menacing. "It's about justice, for Emily, for Jake, and for anyone else who's ever suffered at your hands. And believe me, the world will know everything." Victor's composure finally shattered, his mask of confidence slipping away to reveal the fear beneath. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't do this. We can work something out." But Trump wasn't listening. His tweet was already drafted, a damning accusation backed by irrefutable evidence. Photos of Jake's bruised wrist, Screenshots of private messages between Victor and Emily, even a video clip of Victor losing his temper, all compiled into a single post designed to expose the truth. As Trump hit send, the cafe erupted into chaos once more. Patrons scrambled for their phones, eager to capture the moment. Baristas paused mid-order, their jaws dropping in disbelief. Even the barista who had been cleaning cups stopped mid-motion, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. Within seconds, the tweet went viral. News outlets picked up the story, reporters scrambling to verify the details. Hashtags like #JusticeForEmily and #ExposeVictor trended worldwide, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. For Victor, there was no turning back. Just as the cafe reached its boiling point, the doors burst open with a deafening crash. A team of heavily armed SWAT officers stormed inside, their tactical gear glinting under the fluorescent lights. Guns drawn, they moved swiftly through the crowd, their boots pounding against the tiled floor. "Victor Smith!" one officer barked, his voice loud and authoritative. "You're under arrest for domestic violence, obstruction of justice, and concealment of evidence. Step away from the suspects and place your hands behind your head." Victor froze, his face pale with terror. For the first time in his life, he found himself powerless, cornered by forces far greater than any he had faced before. Slowly, he raised his hands, his movements stiff and mechanical. As the officers closed in, he cast a final glance at Trump, his eyes filled with hatred and despair. "You'll pay for this," Victor muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of you." But Trump didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention to Jake, who stood beside him, clutching the broken toy airplane tightly. The boy's face was a mix of relief and triumph, his earlier fear replaced by a newfound sense of courage. "It's over now," Trump said softly, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We'll make sure you and your mom are safe." Jake nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the officers led Victor away in handcuffs, Trump noticed something unusual in Jake's behavior. The boy seemed unusually calm, almost calculating, despite the chaos surrounding him. It was then that Trump remembered the brief conversation earlier, the mention of hacking cameras and collecting evidence. "Jake," Trump said suddenly, his curiosity piqued. "Tell me about those cameras. How did you manage to get footage of Victor?" Jake smiled faintly, a hint of pride in his young features. "I've been practicing," he admitted sheepishly. "Dad taught me some stuff before he left. I figured if I could hack into Victor's security system, I'd have proof of what he was doing." Trump blinked in surprise. "Your dad taught you how to hack?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. He said it was important to know how things work, especially if you want to protect yourself and the people you care about." The revelation left Trump speechless. Here was a 6-year-old boy, armed not with brute strength but with intelligence and resourcefulness. In many ways, Jake reminded him of himself, ambitious, determined, and unafraid to take risks. "Well, you certainly gave Victor a run for his money," Trump said finally, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And you did it all without firing a single shot. That takes real skill." Jake grinned, clearly pleased with the compliment. "I just wanted to save Mom," he said simply. "She deserves better than Victor." The cafe was deathly silent as Trump's words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on everyone present. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Patrons froze mid-sip, baristas paused with milk pitchers raised, and even the rhythmic whirring of the espresso machine faltered under the tension. 5 minutes, Trump repeated firmly, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "That's all you've got, Victor. Explain yourself, or face the consequences." Victor swallowed hard, his polished demeanor cracking under the pressure. Gone was the confident lawyer who had walked into the cafe moments earlier. Now, he resembled a cornered animal, his eyes darting nervously between Trump, Jake, and the growing crowd of onlookers. "You wouldn't dare," Victor shot back, attempting to regain control of the situation. His voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear lurking beneath his bravado. A tweet from you could ruin me, but it would also destroy your reputation. People might start asking questions about our shared past." Trump leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Victor's. "Oh, I'd love nothing more than to revisit old times," he said coldly. "But let's focus on the present, shall we? Why are you so desperate to keep Jake quiet? And what exactly have you done to Emily?" Victor hesitated, his mind racing. He knew Trump wasn't bluffing. The man had proven time and again that he wasn't afraid to use social media as a weapon. A single tweet could bring Victor's carefully constructed world crashing down. But surrendering wasn't an option either. "Not yet. I don't know what this kid is talking about," Victor replied finally, forcing a laugh. "Emily and I are happily married. As for Jake, well, kids will be kids. He probably fell or something." Jake stepped forward, his small frame trembling with anger. "You liar!" he shouted, his voice ringing out across the cafe. "You hit Mom! You locked her in the garage! And when I tried to stop you, you grabbed me!" Trump watched the exchange intently, his instincts screaming warning bells. There was no mistaking the truth in Jake's words, the raw emotion, the unshakable conviction. Yet Victor remained steadfast, his denial unwavering. It was clear that brute force alone wouldn't be enough to break him. A different approach was needed. Without hesitation, Trump pulled out his smartphone, its sleek surface glinting under the harsh lighting of the cafe. With practiced ease, he began typing, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Each keystroke carried the weight of impending doom for Victor, whose face grew paler with each passing second. "This isn't just about you anymore, Victor," Trump said, his voice low but menacing. "It's about justice, for Emily, for Jake, and for anyone else who's ever suffered at your hands. And believe me, the world will know everything." As Trump drafted his tweet, the cafe erupted into whispers. Patrons scrambled for their phones, eager to capture the moment. Baristas paused mid-order, their jaws dropping in disbelief. Even the barista who had been cleaning cups stopped mid-motion, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. Within seconds, the tweet went viral. News outlets picked up the story, reporters scrambling to verify the details. Hashtags like #JusticeForEmily and #ExposeVictor trended worldwide, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. For Victor, there was no turning back. Just as the cafe reached its boiling point, Trump turned his attention to Jake. The boy stood beside him, clutching the broken toy airplane tightly, his young features a mix of relief and triumph. Trump crouched down to meet him at eye level, his expression softening slightly. "Jake," Trump said gently, "tell me everything you know. Every detail matters now." Jake nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "Victor keeps cameras everywhere," he whispered. "He records everything Mom does. I hacked into his system last week and found videos of him hitting her. That's why I wanted to call the police, but my phone doesn't work." Trump's eyes widened in surprise. "You hacked into Victor's security system?" he asked incredulously. "At 6 years old?" Jake shrugged sheepishly. "Dad taught me some stuff before he left," he admitted. "He said it was important to know how things work, especially if you want to protect yourself and the people you care about." The revelation left Trump speechless. Here was a child armed not with brute strength but with intelligence and resourcefulness. In many ways, Jake reminded him of himself, ambitious, determined, and unafraid to take risks. "Well, you certainly gave Victor a run for his money," Trump said finally, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And you did it all without firing a single shot. That takes real skill." Jake grinned, clearly pleased with the compliment. "I just wanted to save Mom," he said simply. "She deserves better than Victor." With new evidence in hand, Trump returned to his phone, typing furiously. This time, his tweet included screenshots of the damning footage Jake had uncovered, photos of Emily being assaulted, transcripts of threatening messages, and even timestamps proving Victor's involvement in other illegal activities. "Victor Smith," Trump announced loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the cafe. "Your reign of terror ends today." prepared to face the consequences of your actions. Victor's composure finally shattered, his mask of confidence slipping away to reveal the fear beneath. "You'll pay for this," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of you?" But Trump didn't respond. Instead, he hit send, watching as the tweet disappeared into cyberspace. Within moments, the cafe erupted into chaos once more. Phones buzzed, cameras flashed, and voices rose in excitement. For Victor, there was no escape. As the first responders arrived, sirens blaring in the distance, Trump turned to Jake one last time. "You were brave today," he said softly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Braver than most adults I know." Jake smiled faintly, his exhaustion evident. "Thanks," he murmured. "But I couldn't have done it without you." Trump chuckled lightly. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "This is just the beginning." As the dust settled in the chaotic aftermath of Victor's arrest, a heavy silence enveloped the cafe. The SWAT team had departed with their prisoner, leaving behind a trail of tension and unanswered questions. Patrons slowly returned to their seats, whispering amongst themselves about the surreal events that had unfolded before their eyes. Baristas resumed their work, though their hands trembled slightly as they prepared drinks for customers who seemed too stunned to speak. At the center of it all stood Trump, his gaze fixed on Emily as she stepped forward from the shadows. Her presence was both fragile and defiant, her disheveled appearance belying the strength within her. She wore an old wedding ring on her left hand, a relic of a love long buried but never forgotten. "Donald," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's really you." Trump nodded slowly, his sharp blue eyes softening at the sight of her. For a moment, he was transported back to another time, when they were young, ambitious, and full of dreams. Back then, Emily had been the light in his life, the one person who understood him better than anyone else. But fate had intervened, tearing them apart and setting them on vastly different paths. "I thought I'd never see you again," Trump said finally, his voice low but steady. "What happened, Emily? Why did you choose Victor over me?" Emily hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak but no words coming out. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she took a deep breath and began her story. "It wasn't my choice," she admitted softly. "Victor, he manipulated me. He promised me safety, security, a future free from worry. But once we were married, everything changed. The man I thought I knew turned into someone else entirely, a monster who controlled every aspect of my life." Trump frowned, his expression darkening with anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "We could have fought together. We could have stopped him." Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. "I tried, Donald. Believe me, I tried. But Victor threatened me, threatened Jake too. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd ruin everything I cared about. And I couldn't risk losing my son." Her words trailed off, leaving an aching silence between them. Trump felt a surge of guilt wash over him, mingling with the anger and regret that had haunted him for years. Had he been so consumed by ambition and success that he failed to notice what was happening right under his nose? Had he abandoned Emily when she needed him most? "No more excuses," Trump said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "You and Jake are safe now. I won't let anything happen to either of you." Emily nodded gratefully, her tears flowing freely now. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." As the emotional weight of the moment settled around them, Trump found himself drawn back to memories of their shared past. He remembered the first time he met Emily, a bright, ambitious woman with a fiery spirit that matched his own. They had fallen in love quickly, their connection deepening with each passing day. But just as things seemed to be going perfectly, Victor had appeared on the scene, charming Emily with promises of stability and security. At the time, Trump had dismissed Victor as nothing more than a rival suitor, confident that his own charm and charisma would win Emily's heart. But he had underestimated the power of manipulation and fear. By the time he realized what was happening, it was already too late. Emily had married Victor, and Trump had been forced to watch from afar as his dreams slipped away. Now, standing face to face with her once again, Trump understood the truth. Emily hadn't chosen Victor willingly. She had been coerced, trapped in a web of lies and deceit that had destroyed her life. And while he couldn't change the past, he vowed to make amends for his failures, for both Emily and Jake. With renewed determination, Trump turned his attention to the task at hand. Using his vast network of connections, he began laying the groundwork for a campaign against domestic violence. His goal was simple yet ambitious: to create a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of abuse and raising awareness about the issue. It was a cause close to his heart, one that gave him a chance to redeem himself after years of controversy and criticism. Jake watched the proceedings with quiet admiration, his small frame radiating a sense of pride. Though only 6 years old, he understood the significance of what was happening. For the first time in his short life, he felt truly safe, protected not just by his mother but by a powerful ally who believed in justice and fairness. "You're doing great, Mom," Jake said softly, slipping his hand into hers. "And Mr. Trump, thank you for helping us." Trump smiled faintly, touched by the boy's sincerity. "You're welcome, Jake," he replied. "But remember, courage isn't just about being strong, it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." As the days passed, the pieces of Emily and Jake's lives began falling into place. With Trump's support, they secured a safe house far from Victor's reach, where they could start anew without fear of retaliation. Emily enrolled in therapy sessions to heal from the trauma of her marriage, while Jake continued honing his skills as a budding hacker under the guidance of trusted mentors. Meanwhile, Trump threw himself into the creation of the foundation, pouring his energy and resources into making it a success. He worked tirelessly to raise funds, organize events, and spread awareness about domestic violence through social media and public appearances. Slowly but surely, the foundation gained traction, becoming a beacon of hope for countless families across the country. Through it all, Trump learned an important lesson: true strength lies not in power or wealth but in the ability to help others. And though he would always carry the scars of his past mistakes, he found solace in knowing that he had made a difference, in the lives of Emily and Jake, and in the world at large. In the days that followed Victor's arrest, a profound sense of change swept through the lives of those involved. For Emily and Jake, the weight of fear that had once suffocated them began to lift, replaced by cautious optimism. And for Donald Trump, the events at the Starbucks in Manhattan marked the beginning of an unexpected journey, one that would challenge his perceptions of power, justice, and redemption. Trump wasted no time in transforming his outrage into action. Leveraging his vast network of connections and influence, he embarked on a mission to create a foundation dedicated to combating domestic violence. The cause was deeply personal, rooted in his guilt over failing Emily years ago and his newfound respect for the courage demonstrated by Jake. "Domestic violence isn't just a private matter," Trump declared during a press conference held at Trump Tower. "It's a societal issue that demands our attention and action. We can no longer turn a blind eye while innocent lives are destroyed." The announcement sent shockwaves through the media landscape. Critics were quick to dismiss it as another publicity stunt, but supporters saw it as a genuine effort to make amends. Regardless of motive, the initiative gained traction almost immediately. Celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike rallied behind the cause, donating funds and volunteering their time to help build the foundation from the ground up. At its core, the foundation aimed to provide resources and support for victims of domestic abuse, safe housing, legal assistance, counseling services, and educational programs designed to empower survivors. But Trump also recognized the importance of raising awareness, using his social media platforms to amplify the voices of those who had suffered in silence for too long. "We need to normalize conversations about domestic violence," he said during one of his many interviews. "Too often, victims feel ashamed or afraid to speak out. It's time we change that narrative." As part of his efforts to connect with Jake, Trump arranged for the delivery of a special gift, a state-of-the-art remote-controlled airplane. The sleek, high-tech toy was a far cry from the battered model Jake had brought to the cafe, yet it carried the same symbolic significance. When the package arrived at their safe house, Jake's eyes lit up with excitement. He carefully unpacked the box, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the aircraft. Beside him, Emily watched with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "This is incredible," Jake whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Thank you, Mr. Trump." Trump's response came via a handwritten note tucked inside the box. "Jake, this isn't just a toy, it's a reminder of your bravery. You proved that even the smallest among us can make a big difference when we stand up for what's right. Keep flying high, my friend." For Jake, the gesture meant more than words could express. It was validation of his efforts, proof that his actions had truly mattered. And for Emily, it was a sign that perhaps there was still good in the world, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. A few weeks later, Trump stood before a packed auditorium, delivering a speech that would resonate with audiences around the globe. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and spectators leaned forward in anticipation. What they heard next challenged everything they thought they knew about the former president. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trump began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Today I want to talk about courage, not the kind you see in movies or read about in books, but the quiet, unassuming bravery that exists in each of us. Courage isn't measured by how strong you are or how loud you shout. It's defined by your willingness to face your fears, to protect those you love, and to fight for justice, even when the odds seem insurmountable." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "I've spent much of my life building walls, walls of wealth, walls of power, walls of privilege. But in recent weeks, I've come to realize that true strength lies not in isolation but in connection. In helping others. In making a difference." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the room. Some clapped out of admiration, others out of disbelief. But regardless of their reasons, one thing was clear: Donald Trump had changed. As the foundation grew in size and scope, Trump found himself drawn back to memories of Emily, the woman he had loved so deeply but lost so tragically. Their shared history served as both a reminder of his failures and a catalyst for his transformation. Through her struggles, he saw the face of countless other victims whose stories deserved to be told. "I owe this to you, Emily," he murmured one evening, staring out at the city skyline from his office window. "And to Jake. To everyone who has ever felt powerless against the forces of oppression." His words carried a weight he hadn't anticipated, a mix of regret, determination, and hope. For the first time in years, Trump felt truly alive, not because of his wealth or fame, but because of the impact he was making on the lives of others. The bustling streets of Manhattan seemed quieter now, as if the city itself had paused to reflect on the events that had unfolded. High above the skyline, Jake stood on the rooftop of Trump Tower, his small frame silhouetted against the setting sun. In his hands he held the sleek remote-controlled airplane gifted to him by Trump, a symbol of courage and resilience. With a determined flick of his wrist, Jake launched the aircraft into the air. It soared gracefully, its tiny propellers humming softly as it circled the towering skyscrapers below. From her vantage point, Emily watched her son with a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, free from fear, free from oppression, and free to embrace the future. Trump observed the scene from a nearby window, his sharp blue eyes softened by a rare smile. Though he had initially been drawn into the situation out of curiosity and obligation, he found himself deeply moved by the strength and determination displayed by both Emily and Jake. Their story had challenged his perceptions of power, justice, and redemption, forcing him to confront his own flaws and shortcomings. "It's amazing what one person can achieve when they're willing to fight for what's right," Trump murmured to himself, his gaze fixed on the tiny airplane darting through the evening sky. As the foundation he had established continued to grow, Trump found himself reflecting often on the concept of courage. In his speeches and interviews, he spoke passionately about the importance of standing up for justice, even when it seemed impossible or inconvenient. "Courage isn't just about being strong," he said during one particularly memorable address. "It's about facing your fears head-on, about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and about making choices that align with your values, even when it costs you personally. These words resonated deeply with audiences around the world, inspiring countless individuals to take action in their own lives. Through the foundation, victims of domestic violence found solace and support, while advocates gained a powerful ally in their fight for change. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt by Trump himself. By helping others, he had discovered a sense of purpose that transcended wealth and fame. He realized that true strength lay not in dominance but in connection, in the ability to lift others up and create positive change. One morning, as the city lights began to twinkle in the distance, Trump prepared to leave his penthouse suite, glancing out at the city below. Somewhere among the throngs of people rushing to work, attending school, and going about their daily lives, Jake was flying his airplane, Emily was building a new future, and Victor was paying for his crimes. "America needs more kids like you, and fewer people like Victor," Trump muttered under his breath, echoing the words he had spoken so many times before. It was a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of an entire nation's hopes and dreams. With a final glance at the horizon, Trump stepped into the elevator, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in years, he did so not with arrogance or bravado but with humility and purpose. A man transformed by the courage of a 6-year-old boy and the love of a woman he had once lost. And somewhere, high above the city, Jake's airplane continued its flight, a symbol of hope and renewal in a world that so desperately needed both. What you've just witnessed is only the beginning of a long journey. As Donald Trump watches Jake's remote-controlled airplane circle around Trump Tower, he can't help but wonder, could this be his last chance to make amends for the mistakes of his past? And what about Emily, the woman wearing Trump's old wedding ring? Will she be ready to open her heart and start over? But don't go anywhere just yet. In the next episode, we'll uncover the biggest secret behind the connection between Trump, Emily, and Victor, and how it has shaped the entire story. You definitely don't want to miss it. So hit like and turn on notifications to stay updated the moment new content drops. Because sometimes the simplest stories hold the greatest lessons,